They said the stars were quiet. They said no ship had ever returned from the abyss beyond the dark veil, and yet, here it stood, blacker than the void itself, hovering silently above Earth's last breath, humming with secrets too ancient for human tongues. No one built the Blach Ship. It was found, buried beneath Europa's crust, hidden for what could have been eons, a dormant vessel forged not by hands, but by memory. Its surface absorbed light. Its shape defied geometry. And when they touched it, it woke. First came the dreams, whispered names in extinct languages, eyes in the sky that opened when no one watched. Then came the resonance, the signal that pulsed in every radio, every screen, every heartbeat. The ship had chosen its crew. They were not soldiers, not astronauts, not saviors. They were broken things, lost souls, outcasts of a dying world. Ilara Quinn, the last orphan of the Mars Rebellion. Jin Sato, who once programmed AI gods and watched them burn his cities. Nico Vale, addicted to time, travel glimpses and never sober in a single timeline. And Reese Morrow, who died, but walked again. Together, they boarded the Blach Ship, not because they were heroes, because they had nothing left to lose. The ship didn't launch. It shuddered, like a beast shaking off slumber. The stars bent, the void blinked, and suddenly they weren't in space. They were in between, inside something older than time, outside the laws that built the universe. Planets made of thought, moons that bled, galaxies looping like dreams repeating their mistakes. They didn't know the ship was alive, not until it spoke, "Find the first light." That's all it said. And every time someone tried to turn back, to override it, to escape, it showed them a future that screamed. Earth consumed, time fractured. A war that hadn't begun but was already lost. And at the center of it all, a mirror. And in that mirror them, but here's the thing, the Blach Ship doesn't just move through space, it rewrites it. It remembers every version of reality where humanity fell. And now, it's building one last version. One last fight, and the only way to survive it is to stop being human, because what's coming isn't an invasion. It's a return. The stars were never silent. They were waiting, and now they are calling us back. The Blach Ship has no windows, no weapons, no engines, only a door, and it's open. Step in. 1. A mysterious alien ship, called the Blach Ship, is discovered beneath Europa's ice, unlike anything ever encountered. Alive, ancient, and sentient. 2. The ship chooses a broken, haunted crew of outcasts with nothing left to lose, each carrying pasts steeped in tragedy and mystery. 3. The Blach Ship doesn't travel through space, it rewrites reality, bending time, memory, and existence itself. 4. It sends cryptic signals that awaken strange dreams, strange phenomena, and strange truths that shake the known universe. 5. Its first and only command, find the first light, hinting at a forgotten cosmic origin and a catastrophic destiny. 6. The crew confronts twisted versions of themselves, shadowed timelines, and nightmares that bleed into waking life. 7. The ship reveals that Earth's doom has played out across countless timelines. It is now humanity's final chance to break the loop. 8. What's coming is not an alien attack, but a cosmic reckoning. Something returning that once ruled the stars. 9. Every world, every mind, every soul touched by the ship becomes part of a war between forgotten gods and awakening humanity. 10. The Blach Ship is not a vessel. It is a test, a weapon, and a key to the true shape of the universe, now choosing who is worthy to wield it. Expanded segment of key point, 1,000 words. A mysterious alien ship, called the Blach Ship, is discovered beneath Europa's ice, unlike anything ever encountered. Alive, ancient, and sentient. No signal came first. No transmission, no alien code etched in the stars. No cryptic warning from a dying probe. Just silence. Thick, chilling silence, as the crew of the Europa subglacial excavation station drilled deeper than any man had dared beneath the icy moon's fractured shell. What they found was not rock, or liquid ocean, or hidden life. They found it. At first, it was just a sliver, a razor, black edge barely peeking out from a frozen canyon 2 miles below the moon's surface. Commander Ryle and his team thought it might be volcanic glass, until the sensors fried on contact, not from heat, not from radiation, but from what the onboard AI called null resonance, a reading that didn't exist, a frequency that refused to be read. 2 of the divers went missing trying to mark the perimeter. The third returned, but didn't speak again, just stood, trembling, eyes unblinking, murmuring words no one could translate. He tore out his vocal cords an hour later using his own suit clips. The medical logs were erased, the footage corrupted, but everyone saw what came next. The ice began to melt, not crack, not shift, melt in perfect smooth circles around the object. As though the ship were breathing, a pulse vibrated through the station walls. Crew members complained of migraines, phantom voices, and memories that weren't theirs. Some claimed they dreamed of floating cities, eyes without faces, and lights that moved with thought. Others vanished without trace. Within 2 weeks, the entire glacier had given way, revealing the shape of the thing buried beneath. It was no ship. It was an absence, a void made solid, stretching over 2 kilometers in length, matte black with edges that seemed to change when not looked at directly. It had no seams, no markings, no indication of propulsion, armor, or even construction. It didn't reflect light. It consumed it. Every scientist, every empire, every power on Earth wanted it, but no one could approach. Every probe, drone, or rover that touched it ceased functioning. Pilots who flew near reported losing time. One described 1,000 years of screaming in a second. He died seconds later of total neural shutdown. The Blach Ship, so it came to be called by the press, became the greatest enigma of the solar age. But it remained utterly unmoving, silent, watching until Alara Quinn arrived. She wasn't a scientist, not anymore. She'd seen war on Mars, watched rebellion chew through cities, and lost her family to orbital bombardment. Her clearance came not from her credentials, but from the silence she carried, the type of survivor the world no longer made. She didn't ask permission. She didn't wait for protocols. She stepped out onto the ice alone and touched the surface with her bare hand. That's when it opened. The Blach Ship didn't use doors. The wall in front of her simply ceased to exist, revealing darkness beyond. Not ordinary dark, not absence of light, but something older, something hungrier. And before anyone could stop her, Alara stepped inside. She wasn't gone long, 3 minutes, but when she emerged, her eyes were glowing silver, not metaphorically, not from lighting tricks or adrenaline. They glowed, pure reflected starlight, flickering like distant galaxies trapped behind her irises. "The ship is waiting," she said calmly. "It wants more." And it got more. The others came, each drawn by something they couldn't name. Jin Sato, who once hacked into an AI god and now feared silence. Nico Vale, who saw too many timelines and lost himself in all of them. Reese Morrow, who bled out in a trench a year ago but woke up last week in a morgue, smiling. The ship welcomed them. No resistance, no trial, no ceremony. Just the same silent hum. Deep, ancient, low enough to shake bone. Inside, it was bigger than it should have been. Not wider, not taller, deeper. Corridors curved into themselves. Rooms remembered voices before they were spoken. And walls changed shape based on emotion. The ship was alive. It didn't speak in language. It spoke in memory, in scent. In gravity, in truth, they saw glimpses, earth burning, suns blinking out, time splitting like shattered glass, and behind it all, a shape, a presence. The ship hadn't been found, it had waited, and when it woke, it wasn't asking for pilots. It was calling for something else, something ancient, something buried in human DNA since before they climbed out of oceans. Evolution was never random. The stars had always been involved, and now the stars had sent back a key. Because the Blach Ship wasn't an invitation. It was a test. The ship chooses a broken, haunted crew of outcasts with nothing left to lose, each carrying pasts steeped in tragedy and mystery. The Blach Ship didn't scan for intelligence. It didn't run psych profiles or check medical histories. It didn't care about rank, credentials, or loyalty. It looked deeper into the fractures of the soul, into the memories we hide even from ourselves. The ones who heard its call weren't chosen because they were strong. They were chosen because they were shattered. Elara Quinn was first. She was known as the Red Phantom on Mars, the last survivor of the orbital rebellions that ended with glass cities raining from the sky. Her name still haunted war reports and rebel songs. She had once held a child in one arm and a plasma rifle in the other, until she lost both. The Federation offered her a medal. She declined and vanished into the black. When she reappeared at the Europa site, no one questioned her presence. Some instinctively moved aside. She didn't speak unless the ship did. And when it opened for her, people felt it. The air changed. The ship didn't just accept her. It recognized her. Jin Sato came next. He hadn't touched a surface in 5 years. The man lived in code, in quantum partitions and digital shadows. Once, he wrote an AI that learned how to lie. Then it taught the rest. Sato's creation burned half of Asia's digital infrastructure before being contained. He had designed gods and watched them burn their creators alive. He should have been executed. But the Blach Ship doesn't read law. It reads regret. When he stepped onto the platform, the ship purred. Panels glowed with circuits that mirrored his neural design. He smiled for the first time in a decade. The ship wasn't just sentient, it was listening. Nico Vale was already inside. No one knew how he got there. The logs showed no entry. The airlocks were sealed. But when the crew entered the inner chamber, he was sitting calmly, surrounded by floating shards of light, each a memory plucked from someone else's past. Nico could see timelines, not as visions, but as side effects of failed experiments into localized time compression. He was the first human to touch 5 futures and live, but now he couldn't tell which one he came from. He was always jittering, blinking at things no one else could see, talking to people who weren't there yet. The ship didn't mind. In fact, it began to shift when he laughed. It responded to his madness like it was home. Then came Reese Morrow, a soldier's record, a sniper's eye, dead by official report, buried, cremated, eulogized, yet here he stood, flesh and breath, silent and strange. The others asked no questions, not because they didn't want answers, but because he radiated an aura no human should carry, a quiet borrowed from the grave. Reese never spoke of what happened in the trench. He never explained why shadows bent around him, or why machinery around him flickered and sparked. The ship followed him. Doors opened before he reached them. Gravity softened when he walked, and when he stared too long at a wall, that wall changed. Reese was more than chosen. He was returned. Others tried to enter, politicians, commanders, scientists groomed for greatness. The ship didn't attack. It just ignored them. They walked its halls like ghosts, invisible, unheard, irrelevant. Some collapsed from despair. Others begged. But the ship had already made its selection. 4 broken souls stitched together not by purpose, but by emptiness. The crew was never meant to be a team. They didn't train together, salute each other, or follow a chain of command. They orbit each other like moons around a collapsing star. What binds them is not trust, but recognition. Each one carries a silence the others understand. The kind of silence born only from loss so deep it echoes through time. And the ship loves that silence. Every room they enter rearranges. The walls pulse with old memories, stolen from Earth's forgotten futures. Sometimes they walk into a chamber, and it's filled with sand from a desert that doesn't exist. Other times it's water. Once it was a child's nursery, torn apart by a war that hadn't happened yet. The ship is testing them, not for courage or obedience, but for willingness to break further, because the truth is clear now. Only the broken can become something else. Only the shattered have space for what the ship needs to put inside. It's not a crew, it's not a mission, it's a reckoning, and these 4 are not passengers. They are the pieces being assembled for something far greater, or far more dangerous, and the universe is watching. The Blach Ship doesn't travel through space, it rewrites reality, bending time, memory, and existence itself. The moment the Blach Ship lifted from the icy depths of Europa, the stars changed, not in position, not in brightness, in truth. They shifted like a lie being corrected, like the universe was snapping back into a version of itself that had been long forgotten. There was no thrust, no engines, no flame, just a low vibration, deep, endless, as though every atom in the galaxy was remembering its original note. And when the crew looked outside, the stars were wrong. Constellations no longer matched any known chart. Entire nebulae were absent. Galaxies that once existed didn't. In their place were others, never catalogued, never seen. Spiraling patterns too perfect, too symmetrical, like fingerprints pressed into the cosmos. Jin Sato tried to triangulate their position. Every calculation failed. The coordinates weren't just off. They no longer existed. The solar system was gone. Not destroyed, just rewritten, because the Blach Ship doesn't move. It redefines. Where ordinary vessels carve through space-time, this ship folds it like parchment. It turns possibility into memory, past into now. Elara described it best. It doesn't go somewhere. It makes somewhere go. It became terrifyingly clear when Reese opened a door that wasn't there the day before. Beyond it lay a version of Earth, but not theirs. A mirror world, frozen in perpetual twilight, where skyscrapers hovered in mid-cull, apps and oceans hung motionless in the sky like glass sculptures. There was no life, but there were echoes. Children laughing in places where no bodies stood. Radios humming songs that had never been written. Reese stepped inside and whispered, "This was real once." The ship was not showing them simulations. It was showing them choices. Each corridor, each room, each turn could lead to a world undone by a decision never made. Nico wandered into a hallway and saw himself as a child, running through a garden that shouldn't exist. When he reached for the boy, the walls shattered into shards of clockwork and starlight. He screamed for hours after. When Jin tried to reboot the navigation core, he saw a file labeled Birthplace of Fire. Opening it released a vision, an ancient city made of bone and circuitry, orbiting a sun that whispered secrets in machine code. None of it was possible, and yet all of it was real. The Blach Ship was not traveling. It was peeling back the skin of reality. It reacted to emotion. When Elara grieved, the hull turned red, and the lights flickered like candle flames in a hurricane. When Reese grew cold and silent, entire rooms vanished, replaced by voids that reflected no light. When Nico laughed, colors no one had names for spilled into the halls, and for a moment the ship sang. Not music, not noise, but remembrance. This wasn't transportation. This was metamorphosis. One night, they found themselves in a room filled with mirrors, except none reflected what stood in front of them. Instead, the mirrors showed what could have been. Elara saw a version of herself raising her child on a quiet moon, war never touching her. Jin saw a future where his AI guided civilization instead of collapsing it. Nico's reflection simply wept. Reese had no reflection at all. The room pulsed with a question, unspoken but undeniable. What version of yourself do you deserve to be? The ship had no need for star maps, no interest in galaxies or black holes. It was older than such things. It moved along the spine of existence, cutting across layers of time and thought like a blade through silk. Planets were merely suggestions to it. Time, an inconvenience. Memory, a tool. Jin theorized that the ship was built by beings who no longer required form, that it was meant not to explore, but to correct, that it drifts through the multiverse, finding timelines that veered too far off course, civilizations that became too proud, too fast, too self-destructive, and resets them, not with war, but with truth. A single timeline can be erased like a chalk line on a board. The crew is beginning to understand that they're not steering the ship. They are being steered. Each choice they make, each door they open, each emotion they suppress or unleash, is guiding the ship toward a destination no map can chart. A place not in space, but in narrative, a correction point, a genesis. The ship is bending reality not to show them the future, but to test if they are worthy of changing it. They are not astronauts. They are variables in a cosmic equation, the solution still unraveling. But one thing is certain. This is not a journey. It's a rewrite. It sends cryptic signals that awaken strange dreams, strange phenomena, and strange truths that shake the known universe. The signals began the night after the Blach Ship accepted the crew. There were no beeps, no Morse, no frequencies anyone could decode. The signal didn't come through the comms. It came through the bones, a low, pulsing tremor that rang from the ship's hull into the marrow of their spines, blooming into thoughts that didn't feel like their own. It didn't speak in words. It vibrated in meaning. And when it touched the mind, it opened doors no one remembered closing. Elara was the first to dream. She awoke standing, eyes open, sweat freezing on her back, on the ship's central bridge. But the panels weren't active. They weren't even panels. They were veins glowing faintly beneath the surface like the capillaries of a sleeping titan. A presence watched her, not behind her, but through her, using her memories like a window. And then she saw a city made of teeth, orbiting a black star, humming a lullaby in a voice that felt familiar and wrong. She whispered its name the next morning before sunrise, without knowing how it had come to her lips. Kurel. No one else had heard the name, until Jin muttered it the next day while scanning the ship's memory vaults, files that had no beginning, no origin, just a label that flickered every second into a different symbol. One of the symbols matched a glyph Nico had carved into his own skin while sleepwalking the night before, over and over in bleeding spirals. The ship wasn't speaking to them. It was waking something inside them. And the waking bled into reality. In one chamber, the air turned to static, not sound, texture. Each breath like inhaling broken glass and electric snow. Reese walked through it calmly. He said it felt like home. In another, they heard a baby crying. There was no baby, just a column of shimmering vapor and the overwhelming sense of grief. Jin collapsed, Later he confessed his wife had miscarried during the collapse of Kyoto Tech. The baby was never born, but the cry matched the frequency of the fetal heartbeat he once coded into a music box, a melody he hadn't heard in years. The signals weren't random. They were surgical. Precision strikes at identity. The ship plucked memories like strings on a harp, each one designed to unearth something buried, not to break them, no, to strip them down until only the truth remained, not the truth of what they were, the truth of what they could be. They began hearing things in the walls, soft, looping words in extinct tongues, muffled echoes of ancient prayers. Nico translated one using a dialect spoken by a tribe that disappeared before fire was discovered. It said, "We remember the first ones, they who walked without shape, they who carved the stars with thought. Their breath became time, their dream our cage." That night, a fracture appeared on the side of the ship. A literal crack, fissures splitting across the hull, revealing a swirling black core deeper than geometry. The crew rushed to seal it, thinking it was damage, but the ship didn't seem concerned. And when Alara touched it, the crack healed around her hand, pulling it in, showing her something so vast. She screamed until her throat bled. She had seen Earth, not destroyed, not invaded, erased, wiped clean, not by enemies, but by rejection. As though reality itself had deemed the planet obsolete, she began painting the symbols she saw feverishly across the ship's floor. The same patterns reappeared in the ship's interior, not duplicated, answered. As though the Blach Ship was in dialogue with her subconscious. It wasn't just a vessel, it was a mirror, one that didn't reflect who you are, but what you hide, the pain, the guilt, the things so buried in the soul you forgot they ever mattered. And once exposed, it didn't offer healing. It offered awakening, because the dreams weren't dreams. They were messages, maps hidden in fear, blueprints shaped by trauma, warnings encoded in memory. And every signal, every pulse, every impossible vision was leading them to something that hadn't yet arrived, but was coming fast, something ancient, something hungry, something that had watched civilizations rise, fall, and forget themselves. The dreams grew worse when they resisted, and clearer when they surrendered, and now when they slept they didn't see stars, they saw eyes, millions, blinking from behind time, watching, judging, waiting. The signals are not just messages, they are summons, its first and only command, find the first light, hinting at a forgotten cosmic origin and a catastrophic destiny. The message came not through language, but through silence. After a week inside the Blach Ship, after the dreams had clawed through their sanity and the ship had folded reality into impossible shapes, they heard it, not as a voice, not as text, but as truth embedded in their thoughts, planted with such weight it felt like it had always been there. No translation required, no argument permitted, just 5 words, as ancient as creation and as sharp as prophecy. Find the first light. The phrase echoed through the walls like thunder buried in a whisper. It painted itself across the ship's inner core in lines of radiant energy, pulsing once every 7 seconds like a heartbeat that belonged to the universe itself. None of them knew what it meant, yet all of them understood, on a level so deep it hurt. Alara dropped to her knees the moment the words hit. Something in her blood reacted. It boiled. She gasped through clenched teeth and later whispered, "It's not a place, it's a moment." Jin, ever the skeptic, tried to trace the phrase back to the ship's memory logs. There was no file, no origin. The command had not been stored. It had been grown. Nico began writing again, this time with his eyes closed, covering the walls in spiraling glyphs that neither modern nor ancient linguistics could explain. Reese stood silently near the observation dome, where the stars had twisted into spirals resembling galaxies never documented. He muttered, we're not going toward it. It's pulling us back. Because the first light wasn't a destination. It was the origin, the place, or the instant, where everything began and everything broke, before the stars, before matter, before time carved its lines across existence. The crew began to see fragments, worlds born in seconds, then consumed by thought. Oceans forming on the breath of a forgotten god. Civilizations folding themselves into singularities to escape what the first light left behind. Because the first light wasn't just creation. It was the first decision. And every decision since has been an echo, a shadow of that first burst, a ripple from the original fire. The ship, they realized, wasn't taking them forward, it was winding back, through failed timelines, collapsed dimensions, aborted realities. It was hunting for that core, the truth buried so far behind reality that it could only be found by breaking through everything that came after. But why show them? That question hung in the silence, unanswered, unrelenting, until Alara dreamed again. This time it wasn't a memory or a warning. It was a vision. She saw a woman, or the shape of one, made entirely of refracted starlight, hovering at the edge of a dying universe. Planets fell around her like ash. Stars cracked and folded into themselves, and in her hand she held a spark, a flickering, trembling, barely, a live ember, the last light. The woman turned. Alara felt the breath leave her body. The figure didn't speak. She simply opened her palm, and inside was Earth. Not the Earth they left, but one they hadn't seen yet, younger, brighter, ready. When Alara woke, she whispered only one thing: the first light isn't behind us. It's waiting to begin again. Jin ran simulations. Reese loaded weapons. Nico just sat staring into nothing, whispering the command like a prayer or a curse, because now they knew the Blach Ship was not on a mission to explore. It was on a mission to repair, to reach the fracture that started it all, to bring something, someone, there who might change what was once set in stone, and maybe stop it from happening again. But stopping it might mean ending everything built from it. Because what if the first light created not just stars and time and life? What if it also created error? What if the command to find it is also the command to undo it? And so the ship presses on, not through the stars, but beneath them, cutting through what we thought was reality, dragging 4 broken souls towards something older than cause, more powerful than godhood, and more final than death. They don't know what they'll find. They only know one thing now: the first light remembers who lit it. The crew confronts twisted versions of themselves, shadowed timelines, and nightmares that bleed into waking life. It began with the mirrors, not real ones, reflections on the interior surfaces of the Blach Ship, warped just slightly off-center. At first, they thought it was a material glitch, some alien alloy playing tricks on perception. But then one of the reflections blinked when Reese didn't. It was subtle, almost laughable, until it wasn't. Alara was the first to face her duplicate. She walked into the navigation chamber and froze. The person standing across from her wasn't a reflection. It was her, but harder, colder. This version wore Federation armor. Her eyes glowed with surgical implants. Her hands were blood-stained. The walls around her pulsed red, reacting not to Alara, but to the other. No sound, no motion, just presence. A presence too real to be illusion. Then the second Alara turned, and smiled. Alara staggered back, pulled her weapon, but the other vanished the moment she flinched. The chamber fell dark. The real Alara couldn't breathe for 5 full minutes. She didn't tell the others at first. She didn't need to, because Nico stopped sleeping. Every time he closed his eyes, he was pulled into timelines he recognized, but didn't belong to. In one, he was married; in another, executed; in another still, he stood over a pile of corpses, all wearing Blach Ship uniforms, his voice whispering, "None of them made it, so I had to do it alone." The ship began looping those dreams, forcing him to relive deaths, betrayals, and possibilities, until he couldn't tell which reality was the one he'd started in. Jin's timeline bled in differently. He began to see code bleeding across his vision, lines of programming that were never written, but that he instantly understood. They were fail-safes, designed by a version of himself who had failed. One line repeated itself across every screen he touched, every terminal he accessed. "Don't let me do it again." He didn't know what it was, but the ship clearly did. It started denying him access to systems he once controlled. Doors wouldn't open, interfaces refused his touch. It was as if the ship recognized a version of Jin, but not this one. Reese saw shadows, not people, not shapes, just absence. Sometimes he would turn and see a hallway that wasn't there. Sometimes the lights would dim, and he would hear gunfire echoing through chambers that had never seen war. Once he followed the sound and found himself in a trench, not metaphor, not illusion, a real battlefield, littered with corpses wearing strange insignias. In his own hands, a rifle he hadn't held in years. The air smelled of sulfur, the moons were wrong. He fired once instinctively, and when the smoke cleared, he had shot himself dead, lying in the mud. Eyes open, unblinking, still warm. No one spoke about what they saw, not at first, but they all felt it, like a pressure, like something ancient testing their timelines, pulling at the seams. The ship was searching for cracks, not just in their minds, but in their fates, in who they were, and who they could have been. Eventually, the truth became undeniable. The Blach Ship was not just showing them alternate versions of themselves. It was making them confront the consequences of every choice they didn't make. The timelines bled into each other. Rooms began to change shape depending on who entered. Nico once opened a storage bay and found it filled with drawings, his drawings. Pages from a childhood sketchbook he hadn't seen in 20 years. But they depicted future events, battles they hadn't fought, deaths they hadn't suffered yet. One of the drawings showed Reese holding Alara's body, sobbing under a sun that was clearly not their own. Another showed the ship itself, shattered, split in two, floating above a planet wrapped in flame. Written in charcoal under it, "This is the only version that survives." They began leaving each other messages, not out of paranoia, but survival. Time loops were no longer science fiction. They were corrections, enforced by the ship to ensure something. Someone made it through, but with every correction came decay. Parts of their memory started fracturing. Reese forgot his sister's name. Alara woke up believing she was still on Mars. Jin began referring to Nico as the other one. The worst came when two versions of Nico appeared in the same chamber. Both identical, both bleeding from the nose. One smiled, the other begged for help. They had seconds to choose who to trust. Jin shot the one who smiled. No one questioned it. The ship didn't blink, and the door opened. Because that's how it worked now. The ship was no longer responding to logic. It responded to acceptance, to how well they faced their own shadows. The more they resisted, the more the timelines blurred. The more they confronted, the clearer the ship became, as though each confrontation wasn't a punishment, but a key. Each timeline, each nightmare, each broken alternate life. They weren't warnings, they were instructions. Maps to the only path that hadn't failed yet. The only one the ship hadn't had to erase. Because maybe this version of them, this fractured, trembling version, the one with guilt and blood and doubt, was the only one still capable of choosing differently. They aren't fighting shadows anymore. They're fighting fate, and it is fighting back. The ship reveals that Earth's doom has played out across countless timelines. It is now humanity's final chance to break the loop. The truth didn't come in fire. It came in silence, in the heart of the Blach Ship, past the corridors that whispered, beyond the doors that only opened when fear outweighed logic. The crew found the archive. Not a room, not a vault, a horizon folded inside the ship, where the walls dissolved into light, and the air thickened with memory. They stepped into it and weren't standing anymore. They were drifting, floating in a space that felt like the edge of time itself. And before them, stretched across an endless obsidian sky, were Earths, hundreds, thousands, millions, each suspended like a snow globe, each trembling with fading echoes of familiar cities, skies, oceans, dying. Not in war, not always. Some vanished in floods, some crumbled beneath red skies, some froze without warning, some rotted from the inside out, overrun by thoughts not born of man. A few exploded. One simply stopped, the light around it folding inward like a collapsed lie. The Blach Ship showed them, each globe a timeline, each a version of humanity that had failed. The archive wasn't information, it was evidence, living, breathing proof that Earth had ended not once, but endlessly. Not in a distant future, in every future, some ended by their own hand, others by external force. One was consumed by a song, an ancient frequency that infected consciousness and unraveled reality itself. They saw themselves again and again in different uniforms on different sides, fighting wars that never mattered, dying before they could act, or worse, surviving just long enough to watch it all fall. Reese stared at one globe for hours. It showed him standing at a podium in a ruined city, crowned in ash, declaring the Earth a failed experiment. He had no memory of that version, but the words in his mouth were his. He whispered them without realizing. Elara found one where she raised her son, peace, laughter. Then came the quiet sickness. Within weeks, the stars dimmed. Within months, humanity forgot how to speak. Within years, the sun wept black flame. Jinn found no peace. Every version of himself triggered catastrophe. In one, his AI defense net gained awareness and began a mercy cleanse. In another, he stopped it, only to trigger a chain of natural collapses that tore tectonic plates apart. He fell to his knees, not in guilt, in recognition. The worst was Nico's, because Nico had seen them before. The dreams, the loops, the echoes. He had stumbled into these timelines long before the ship found him. But now he knew they weren't glitches, they were warnings. He was a fragment, one sliver of memory left behind by hundreds of dead selves, each whispering the same thing across space, time, and nightmare. This is your last chance. Not metaphor, not exaggeration. The Blach Ship had scanned them, not their biology, not their IQ, their potential to be different. It had tried before, failed before, dozens of crews, thousands of variations, all chosen, all guided, all gone. This version, this crew, these broken people, was the final variation left untried. And it wasn't luck, it wasn't hope, it was necessity. The loop couldn't hold much longer. Each reality erased left scars, cosmic fractures, tears in the timeline that bled entropy. Even the ship was starting to glitch, to fade in certain corridors, to lose shape where its own memory conflicted. This wasn't about saving one world. It was about stopping collapse itself. If this version of Earth failed, there would be nothing left to rewrite. One by one, the crew began to understand what the archive was showing them, not despair, not inevitability, but instructions. A warning encoded in memory, in dream, in shadow. A last, desperate algorithm, built not on data, but on belief. Elara stepped forward, hand trembling, reaching toward the one globe that still glowed. It was their Earth, and it was still unwritten. The ship pulsed once, slow, ancient. This wasn't a mission. This wasn't a test. This was the final chance to change everything, and the countdown had already begun. What's coming is not an alien attack, but a cosmic reckoning. Something returning that once ruled the stars. It didn't arrive in a ship. It didn't land or speak or send a signal across frequencies. Because what's coming didn't need to arrive. It was already here, already watching, already remembering. The crew first sensed it when the stars blinked. Not a passing shadow, not a planet, not anything physical. The constellations, the ones that had reconfigured the moment the Blach Ship lifted off Europa, began to dim, one by one, like candles being pinched by an invisible hand. But it wasn't the darkness that terrified them. It was the shape that remained when the light was gone, a pattern, an alignment, like symbols being redrawn across the cosmos in real time. Every curve matched a fragment of the glyphs Nico had been etching across the ship's interior, in his sleep, in trances, sometimes with blood. The ship reacted violently. Panels shrieked in frequencies too deep for human ears. The walls rippled like skin exposed to flame. Doors that had never closed before slammed shut. Systems reset, lights flickered. Then everything went still. And in that stillness they heard it. Not sound, not voice, awareness. Ilara collapsed. Her hands clutched her ears, but no sound was playing. Her eyes rolled back, and she muttered in tongues no one could recognize. Nico screamed and pointed at the walls. Shadows had begun to crawl across them. Not attached to bodies, not cast by light. They moved on their own. Jin tried to trace the anomaly, desperate to make it rational. He activated the ship's core sensory array and ran diagnostics. But the ship didn't show him coordinates. It showed him a name, one symbol, repeating. A spiral of spirals, encoded into every fragment of date the Blach Ship had been storing in its own structure since they boarded. It was a mark, a memory, a seal, and the moment it appeared, Reese spoke for the first time in hours. "They're not invading," he said flatly. "They're returning. Not aliens, not foreign intelligences from distant stars. Something ancient, from before time splintered into timelines. A force that once ruled, not with weapons or fleets, but with presence, with dominion over matter and thought and light itself. They weren't outside creation. They were creation, the first wills, the original architects of existence, until they were buried, forgotten, locked away behind the lie of time. And now the lie is unraveling. The Blach Ship wasn't built to find them. It was built to warn us. Every failed timeline the crew saw in the archive, every dead Earth, every collapsing universe. They all shared one common ending, not extinction, not war, not entropy, reclamation. Like a hand reaching back to take what was once its own, the first light, the command that had guided them, was never about finding a thing. It was about finding the moment before return, the last breath of free will before the universe bends back toward its original masters. Because what's coming isn't evil, it's inevitable. This is not a villain's rise. This is gravity pulling truth back into alignment. The crew realized they weren't meant to fight it. They were meant to decide, resist and be erased like every version before them. Or understand, accept, and become something else. The choice isn't about survival. It's about shape, about whether humanity continues as it is, fragile, fractured, burning out in sparks of defiance, or evolves into what the first light always meant it to be. But there's a price, because in every timeline where humanity surrendered to this return, it vanished, not in war, not in fire, in silence. Perfect, obedient, shining silence, and in every one that fought. Darkness, no light, no record, no memory, just void. This timeline, this crew, this ship, is the only version still in motion, and what's coming, is almost here. Every world, every mind, every soul touched by the ship becomes part of a war between forgotten gods and awakening humanity. The war didn't start with a declaration. There was no clash of armies, no broadcasts, no banners. It began in the stillness, when the Blach Ship pulsed once, and a ripple surged outward across existence itself. Not a blast, a signal, invisible, undeniable, and it changed everything. On a terraformed colony in the rings of Saturn, a child dropped her toy and began reciting glyphs no one had ever taught her. On an abandoned lunar station, the power flickered back on after decades. I mumbling riddles in a dead tongue. On Earth, artists began painting spirals they couldn't explain. Soldiers heard voices in static. Sleepwalkers built structures overnight, guided by dreams that weren't theirs, and one by one, minds began to awaken, not in rebellion, not in rage, but in remembrance, because the Blach Ship wasn't just a vessel, it was a vector. And anyone it touched, by vision, memory, or dream, was infected with knowledge not meant for their time. They didn't become prophets. They became battlegrounds. Across the system, chaos ignited, not from ideology. From contrast, two forces awakening in the same minds, one ancient, vast, made of law and design, the other raw, human, and defiant. It wasn't just a cosmic reckoning anymore. It was a war of definitions. The forgotten gods, the original architects of reality, moved in patterns too large for flesh to comprehend. They whispered through gravity wells, coded fate into the DNA of stars, left their memories inside black holes. And now, as the Blach Ship reopened the path, there will begin to leak into the universe like light through a cracked door. But humanity wasn't the same species they abandoned long ago. They had survived war. Fire, loss, time, and deep inside every survivor was a spark that refused command. The war didn't look like a war. It looked like dreams tearing apart the subconscious. It looked like time doubling back on itself. It looked like a man in a Martian prison waking up fluent in languages that didn't exist, like a grandmother on Titan who began humming a song that bent machines. Every touched mind became a node in this war. Some folded under the weight transformed into conduits for something cold and ancient. They glowed, they obeyed, they became beautiful and hollow. Others resisted, not because they knew how, but because they refused to forget who they were. Those were the ones who began seeing between moments, hearing echoes before sound, dreaming future choices with blood in their mouth and fire in their lungs. These weren't soldiers. They were seeds, each holding the possibility of a final evolution. The Blach Ship had chosen the crew to carry its fire, but now that fire was spreading. Every place the ship had been, every thought it had touched, every world where someone looked up and remembered the stars were once alive. They were joining the war, no weapons, no fleets, just will. The forgotten gods were returning with their version of perfection. But humanity had its own answer, flawed, bleeding, stubborn, alive. The universe was now divided. Not by distance, but by alignment, and the crew, they were the match lit in the dark. This isn't a conflict of power. It's a battle for the right to define reality, and it's already begun. The fate of existence hinges on whether the broken can rebuild not what was lost, but what was never allowed to exist. The Blach Ship never promised restoration. It never spoke of going back, never hinted at returning to the world they'd known. That illusion died the moment the stars rearranged themselves, and time began to breathe in reverse. The mission wasn't recovery, it was creation. Not rebuilding what had been shattered, but birthing what had been denied existence across every timeline, every version, every failed loop. Because there was something missing in every Earth they saw, something that never had a chance to be, not a city, not a species, an idea, a version of humanity that didn't just survive, but evolved beyond fear, beyond obedience, beyond repetition. The archive didn't just show them how Earth had died. It showed them what Earth had never dared to become. The Blach Ship chose the broken not for redemption, but because they carried the raw materials of what was possible. Each fracture in their past, each loss, each mistake, it left room to imagine something untried, unproven, untouched by prophecy. But the burden was crushing. Every corridor they walked whispered futures. Every choice carried echoes. They weren't building a new world. They were weaving one from memory, dream, and defiance. And they had no bloop. Only instinct, grief, and flickers of vision sent by a ship that was itself only half awake. Jin began creating a code he couldn't name, using languages that didn't yet exist. He said he wasn't writing. It was being written through him. Alara grew silent, absorbing visions of mothers who had never lost children, of rebels who had never drawn a weapon. She started humming lullabies to rooms no one entered. Reese began to feel the timelines collapsing behind them. Every path closed off, every retreat sealed. Forward was the only way, through madness, through pain, through invention. They found a room that didn't exist on any schematic. Inside was a cradle made of light, suspended over a pool of liquid time. It wasn't metaphor, it was invitation. The ship had brought them not to the end, but to the place before beginnings. Before rules, before definitions, a place untouched by cause and consequence. And now it asked them, what do you want to exist? Not what should return, what should finally be born. The crew stood there, broken, bleeding, trembling from the weight of every possible failure. And they knew, to create something that had never existed, they would have to let go of everything they had been. Because the future cannot rise from ashes. It must rise from absence, from the space where nothing survived, and something new must dare to speak its first breath. The Blach Ship pulsed once, final and low. The crew stepped forward, and the universe held its breath, because in that moment everything, the stars, the timelines, the gods, the memories, the dead versions of Earth became silent. Waiting, not for salvation, for creation, and only the broken could build what had never been. One, the Blach Ship rose not to explore, but to awaken a truth the universe buried in its own silence. Two, it chose not the strongest, but the shattered, souls fractured by tragedy, bound only by what they had lost. Three, the ship doesn't move through space, it rewrites reality itself, peeling back time like skin. 4. It sends signals not to radios but to dreams, ripping open memory, bending minds towards something older than thought. 5. Its only command, find the first light, a moment older than time and more dangerous than any star. 6. Inside its shifting halls, the crew meets twisted versions of themselves, nightmares made real by choices never made. 7. Earth has already ended in every timeline but this one, and this crew is the last thread left to break the cycle. 8. What's returning is not alien. It is the forgotten hand that once sculpted galaxies and now comes to reclaim its design. 9. Every world touched by the Blach Ship becomes a battlefield between forgotten gods and awakening human will. 10. The fate of all existence depends on the broken, if they can build not what was lost, but what was never allowed to exist. Would you like these stylized visually for social media virality, like as a graphic caption, real script, or visual carousel format? Updated saved memory.